A Cricketing View, an irregular podcast about cricket and other things. Hello and welcome to a new episode of a Cricketing View podcast. My guest today needs absolutely no introduction. Gideon Haigh is a writer of many decades standing. He has written a variety of books about cricket and other subjects, but just on cricket, he's written biographies, series, reviews. He's written about episodes from cricket history. I first got introduced to Gideon Hay's writing through his column Odd Men In, which appeared on Cricinfo for many years. And today I've invited him, and I'm very, very pleased that he's agreed to come on to discuss this relationship between politics and cricket and politics and sport more generally. What makes sport political? What does it mean to say that it is political or it is not political? Where are the boundaries between political speech and institutional discipline? Welcome, Gideon. I'm very, very pleased that we could do this.
Nice to be here, Kartik.
You've been writing about politics in sport for about 25 years now, and there's a long tradition of writing about politics in sport. What do you think the people who say that sport and politics should not mix are really saying?
Well, I think they're it's a kind of a cry of equivalent to the cry of virtue signalling, which is a form of virtue signalling. To say that sport and politics don't mix is actually to make a political statement. So there's sort of no backing away from it. And in fact, we shouldn't be shy about this. We shouldn't be reticent. We shouldn't be defensive about it. In some ways, that sport and politics mix is devoutly to be wished, because otherwise, in cricketing terms, we'd simply focus on the teams as representing, merely a group of self-constituting bureaucratic organisations managing local monopolies. Politics in sport adds an enormous layer of interest to it, makes it, gives it a symbolic weight that it wouldn't carry of its own accord.
I find myself questioning the very premise, in the sense that sport is an organized activity. It is an economic activity. It is an activity which occurs at the level of the individual as well as the group and the collective. I mean, how can it not be political?
Yes.
There are people involved.
Yeah, and I do like that line of Hobsbawm's where he says the imagined community of millions seems more real as a team of 11 named people. The individual, even one who only cheers, becomes a kind of a symbol of the nation, which I think makes it ludicrous to argue against sport's political quotient. If you look at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, which is kind of the sine qua non of modern sport, of course it's a political event.
Yeah.
A bunch of well-drilled, well-resourced, uniformed national exemplars marching behind their country's flags. Not that long since they actually marched in step like conquering armies. That's a political ceremony. I mean, even to invoke the Olympic spirit by saying that it involves, friendship, solidarity, and fair play, the joy of effort, the educational value of good example, universal fundamental ethical principles, sport is a human right, and everyone should be able to practice it without discrimination of any kind. That's all political. They're all political statements, even if perhaps they're honoured more often in the breach.
We have absolutely no difficulty with politics in franchise sport, where tribalism is not only to be wished for, it is encouraged. It is catered to by not only the clubs themselves, but also the commentariat and the broadcasters and everybody else.
It is to be bottled and sold back to us, and we're to be charged for it.
Exactly, and I mean the Ashes are sold essentially as a tribal contest between,
yes.
It's been described to me as a contest between cousins. India's series everywhere in my lifetime, especially since, cable television came along, have been sold on extremely sort of sometimes comically nationalistic grounds.
Mm-hmm.
To take it even further, we have politicians being involved in sport everywhere, not just in India, in all countries.
Well, of course, politicians love nothing more than the low-hanging fruit, and
yes.
Sport does offer a lot of that. Sport is kind of fundamentally reinforcing of the status quo. And for government, it's pretty well a one-way bet. We win, we feel affirmed in our goodness and wholesomeness, and if we lose, we blame the athlete. In the end, it doesn't mean very much at all. Kathy Freeman winning gold at the Olympics in 2000. That's held up as a hugely symbolic of Indigenous progress in Australia, but it means nothing to the everyday lot of Aborigines in Australia. That doesn't change anything about the medievalism of youth detention in the Northern Territory. It doesn't do anything about the deprivation suffered by dispersed Indigenous communities. It appeals to our love of the illusion of the transformative moment. But in fact, the number of transformative moments in sport these days is really very, very small. While significant political change is vast and impersonal and usually imperceptible. Weber's line about slow drilling through thick boards.
Not only that, politicians have always been involved in administration. I mean, you have to only read Mike Marcuse's Anyone with England, where he basically lays out how Lords and the emergence of cricket as the national sport was essentially an exercise in the privatization of land and the centralization by the establishment. Now we say that the current prime minister, when he was in Gujarat, was involved with the Gujarat Cricket Association, but government ministers have been involved in cricket in India since like the 70s and the 80s.
They have,
Mr. Sarve was a minister in the government. And as Mr. Modi was the chief minister of his state, and so many other chief ministers.
And frankly, it was necessary in that time, because if you were going to mobilise economic forces to conduce to cricket's well-being, that it helped to have a degree of political power at your disposal. I guess what has perhaps changed is that the sport in India as a means of distributing political largesse, to the extent where you have Amit Shah and Anurag Thakur basically involved in the factional jockeying to ensure that like-minded people are in positions of power at the BCCI, which results in the organisation being suborned for political ends. So the process is actually happening in the other way around.
That is part of a larger shift. But all this does not really bother people. This is not what they're referring to when they say that sport and politics should not mix. They should not mix. They're saying something else. It is when Moeen Ali wears a bracelet that they say sport and politics should not mix. Or when Megan Rapinoe says something against Trump, they say sport and politics should not mix.
It's strange. It's an absolute kind of terror of it now, isn't it? Sport only seems to be able to assimilate the political at a distance. I remember being reminded of this a couple of years ago when Muhammad Ali died, and I talked. A lot of people were eulogising Ali, the way in which he used his athletic prowess to engineer political change. But it reflected at the time that many of the convictions that Ali held now would be absolutely anathematised. He converted to Islam. He was a conscientious objector, refused to serve his country. He expressed sympathy for enemy combatants. He would have broken the internet every day, Ali, by his professions. And yet, everyone went all nostalgic, and everyone went, wasn't Ali absolutely wonderful? Oblivious to the fact that he couldn't possibly exist under current circumstances. In Ali's era, he preludes that period in which sport was a kind of a dramatisation of the rivalry of the Cold War. It was used in ping pong diplomacy between the US and China. You had Honduras and El Salvador going to war over a World Cup game. You could have, England being exiled from Europe as a result of the behaviour of their football fans. You could have the Soviet Union exercising its power through sports doping, through its chess industrial complex. Then you could use sport for political ends to kind of normalise the racist polity of South Africa. What happened to all that? Have we just forgotten it? It seems to me like immediately after that, perhaps after the collapse of the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, and the the sort of the Fukuyama piece, commerce interposed, and commerce has a strong preference for stable properties on which to project corporate messages, and it likes continuity, it likes blandness, it has a partiality to the entertainment, to the values of the entertainment industry. It was almost as though sport had served its political purposes, and now it could become just another extension of the kind of the stealth neoliberalism that was entering into every aspect of political and economic affairs. And it kind of suited everyone for that to happen. It suited governments, it suited athletes, it suited corporates, it suited fans, it suited the media, and it became a case of keeping the circumstances stable and allowing everyone to hoover up money.
But even in the 60s, it was not as though Ali was a cult hero. I mean, he was a cult hero to some people.
No.
And as were Tommy Smith, who did the Black Power salute in Mexico. They were cult heroes to some people, but they were hated by the establishment.
Yeah. There's a heroism glimpsed in hindsight, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Muhammad Ali is like Mandela. They're like Walt Disney characters now.
Yeah.
It's like in today's history, it's like you speak about all these people. There was the great education reformer in India in the middle of the 19th century. She was encouraged by her husband to study, and her name was Savitribai Phule, and she was hated by the establishment of her day because she was encouraging women to study and everything like that. And now today, of course, in India, there are universities named after her, and scholarships named after her, and the sort of the descendants of the establishment of that time, today's conservative establishment, they laud her. They're like, oh wow, this was a great lady, And the same thing has happened to Mandela, and the same thing has happened to Martin Luther King Jr., and the same thing has happened to Muhammad Ali, and the same thing has happened to the whole 60s. We look back on them, this sense of inevitability. Well, Muhammad Ali was right, and naturally he won. And this was not at all obvious in the 60s.
Nothing is inevitable until it happens.
And sport has that ability to absorb reputations, in a sense.
Yes.
Everything is a commodity. Even outrage, even people getting upset is a commodity right now.
But of course, we're enjoying our freedom there. And the freedom is offered by the fact that sport doesn't matter very much at all. The sport isn't actually a matter of life and death, that we can actually express ourselves in a pretty danger-free environment. Ultimately, no one lives or dies by the outcome in sport, and that kind of has an inverse relationship to the passion with which we describe it.
It's one thing to hope that will be the case. It's another thing to behave in a fashion which and to sort of stoke and fuel furies and anxieties in a way where things could get out of control, just like that. This question of commodification interests me because it seems to me that people object to politics in sport in cases where they don't yet know how to commodify the outrage.
Yes.
For example, if Moeen Ali wears his, Save Gaza bracelet, or Colin Kaepernick takes a knee, then nobody knows how to make money off that. And that, it seems to me, is at the bottom of it all. If you know how to make money, you can say whatever you want, and you can contest whatever you want, and otherwise you can't. Was it always like this?
It's a threatening idea, isn't it? Someone doing something for something other than money. But I mean, to be fair, I mean, there is also the issue around. I'm not sure what the situation is in the United States, but people do things for sport on an honorary basis, in a strange sort of vestige of the former kind of amateur basis of sports constitution. But that's had kind of perverse outcomes now. Sport is sport is varyingly democratic. I can get on my cricket club's committee, but I haven't a hope of getting on the board of Cricket Australia. I haven't a hope of getting on the board of any other of those self-selecting, self-reinforcing oligarchic elites. At the very top levels of sport, administration changes less often than government. The IOC's had 9 presidents since 1894. I mean, no wonder it sees eye to eye with the world's despots.
Yeah. What you're saying is interesting, because getting on your club's committee is, in theory, the ladder on which you could advance further, right?
Yes. Well, not really, not anymore, because that progress has kind of been sealed off by the professionalisation, or the partial professionalisation of the board of Cricket Australia, because they are, of course, not paid standard directors' fees. They're paid honoraria, because to serve on a sporting committee is kind of to act in a philanthropic way. The sports governance is a weird kind of hybrid between sort of hyper-professionalism and vestigial amateurism.
Oh, we have that problem in India right now, which is that the Lodha reforms basically sought to professionalize the day-to-day management of the BCCI. Amendments which Mr. Ganguly and Mr. Shah want are essentially trying to reverse that. They want the day-to-day control to pass back to the elected honorary secretary and president.
Yeah. Yes.
So this idea that amateur management is amateur. I mean, there's a lot of power in sort of that executive authority, even if it is amateur.
Yes.
And it seems to me that the amateurs are unwilling to let that go.
Well, they want to claim they arrogate to themselves the status of amateurs, whereas in fact the power that they wield is disproportionate and subject to negligible regulation and has very, very limited accountability.
Oh yeah, I mean it has the only accountability it has is that you can be sacked by your board.
Well, how often does that happen?
Well, once in 20 years, maybe. This idea of the political transgressing the possibilities of commerce is an interesting one, because I wonder whether the administrators actually have a legitimate case for disciplining that sort of transgression.
For controlling the billboard that they've set up.
Yeah, I mean, apart from the sort of let's say that the legal aspects of this control are manageable. Let's say all the whatever contracts they've signed and whatever obligations they've signed on to of that type are manageable. But in a public sense, from the point of view of the public and from point of view of the fact that sport is ultimately a public endeavor, do they have a point in when they try to discipline this kind of transgression?
Well, they have a kind of a commercial point, but they are exercising kind of quasi-despotic powers in doing so. I'm reminded that Jerome Valk, the Secretary General of FIFA, said not so long ago, less democracy is sometimes better for organising a World Cup. The power that they exercise is kind of unilateral and despotic, and can't help but draw attention to itself, which itself is corrosive of a sport's good name.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of a sort of a slightly tangential example, which was the whole Gale situation in one of the BBL seasons. I think it was 2015.
Yeah.
On the one hand, there was an obvious commercial imperative which was being threatened. That the BBL wanted to market itself as a family event, and this was the Gale episode was making the sponsors antsy, and they had to do something. But at the same time, he's the big ticket superstar. And they can't really do much. So in the end, they made a lot of noise but didn't do anything.
Gale was kind of understandably confused because this
Yeah.
is what he does. This is what he's been richly rewarded for. This is what he's actually brought in to do, which is to add a kind of a glamour and
Yeah.
even a kind of a salacity to the sports endeavours that he's been part of. So he was actually caught on the horns of a dilemma there. There was a series of mixed messages and he only intuited one of them.
Was their entire interest in all this to do with, protecting their asset, or was there some genuine public enterprise?
Well, of course, these days, everyone is made jumpy by the immediate feedback that we get from social media.
Correct.
That you get. I don't get it because I'm not on social media, but we are immediately aware of what at least the noisy majority of sports fans are reacting to. And I think sports administrators are inclined these days to kind of jump at shadows. They're kind of startled by how instantaneous the public response is and how incandescent it can be and how quickly it can build. I mean, in a way, Sandpapergate was a fantastic example of that, happening early in the morning, long before newspapers came out the following day. But frankly, by the time we put our thoughts into print, everyone had already made up their minds, and we were playing catch up with what the public felt. Here,
there's an interesting paradox, which is that because the feedback is so instant and because the cycle, as they say, is so fast, nothing matters for very long, yet everything has to be responded to.
Yes.
Chris Gayle has played a lot of cricket afterwards. And, that incident has not followed him one bit.
No. Which is what makes Sandpapergate, I think, an outsized controversy. The fact that 2 years later we are still talking about it, we are still responding to it, we are still sensitive about it, and we are still censoring ourselves in our discussion of it.
The Australian cricket authorities, they banned those 3 players for a year. My best guess is they did it to sort of protect themselves. And even that failed because almost all of them had to they were either sacked or they had to resign before the year was out.
And they're still banned, of course. Steve Smith is still labouring under a leadership ban, and David Warner labours under an indefinite leadership ban.
Do you think that will be enforced if there is an occasion?
Do I think David Warner will captain Australia, will get the opportunity to fill a leadership role? No, I don't.
But what about Steve Smith? I mean, let's leave aside the fact that he may not actually want the job, but let's say he does.
Oh, I think he does. And I think the path has been laid for him to progress back to it, to give him the opportunity to audition for it. But I think probably Warner, unfortunate for him, there's no sort of public forgive and forget where Warner's concerned. I think there's still a degree of public animus or antagonism towards him, which means that the possibility of remission is very, very limited.
Now, even with this prize that he won last month, even with that?
Yeah.
How does someone in your profession and my hobby live in this universe? I mean, I know that you basically say what you think, and you have an eye on the public nature of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the nature of instant feedback means that you have to face the blowback in the comments section of the Australian. From time to time.
I just find that very entertaining, though.
So, how does someone in your profession and my hobby associate with it? I mean, I have an easy out. I mean, I only write about the things that I'm interested in, and I only do podcasts when I want to. But the professionals don't have that luxury. They have to do something every week, or they have to do whatever they are assigned to do.
Yeah. Well, what do I do? I'm not that different. I kind of do what I please, and I do what interests me, and I like to take time off from cricket to do other things, so that in order for me to be refreshed when I do return to it. I try not to rely on cricket for my as my sort of sole form of professional expression and sole outlet. And I like to go back and play. I'm still a regular player, constant player, which reminds me of just why I fell in love with this game in the first place.
That's now, right? I mean, imagine that you were, I don't know, 3 years into this career.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be a different life, wouldn't it? I mean, because I mean, I suppose sort of one way I could put this is to sort of build on something you said earlier, which is that you said that the institutions have a commercial case for disciplining transgressions, and I think journalism, especially the sports media, also has a commercial case for both for fanning outrage and for being conservative.
Yeah.
In the sense that there is a commercial case for being conservative in all of these entities, right? Even for the sportsmen themselves.
I think one of the advantages that we enjoy in the print media is that we're not rights holders. We don't feel as though we constantly have to big the sport up. We don't have to burnish its commercial value. We can actually be independent, arm's length critics.
Yeah.
More in the nature of perhaps theatre critics than the people in the commentary box. And we can actually take a wider view. And in fact, if we're not taking a wider view, then what the hell are we doing there?
Yeah.
All we're doing, it seems to me, half the time is reporting what people have already seen on television, and even in some cases reporting what the commentators have said. The commentators set the agendas running, and frankly, in the absence of anything better to do, I think a lot of the time the print media kind of falls in step with that. I'm loath to do that. I'm loath to say something that's already been said umpteen times before, even if I'm wrong. I don't see what value a sports journalist is adding if they're simply kind of acting as a kind of a stenographer for what commentators have uttered during the course of the day, or they're scouring Twitter for potential hot takes.
There's another aspect to this politics of coverage, if you will, which is that it's not just a form of conservatism. I have been thinking about this for a while, and sometimes we get these glimpses of players talking about batting or bowling amongst themselves, right? And when they talk amongst themselves, they speak about balance, and they speak about how to be still when they are receiving the ball, and about watching the ball and playing late and using a vertical bat or a horizontal bat, but not something in between. A bowler keeping his line outside off stump, and debates about bowling wide at the crease and getting close to the stumps, and the relationship between the point of release in the delivery stride and the position of the seam, and so on. There's sort of endless technical questions of art involved, and yet if you go into the press conference, the language is about intent and aggression and positivity and courage and big moments. Let's be honest, they're sort of both chauvinistic and sort of obviously chauvinistic.
Yes.
So they fall in the comically nationalist, more comical than nationalist category.
The dynamics of a press conference are peculiar to outsiders. Of course, it's a group of journalists surrounding a player. The journalists have, of course, already written their stories. They're simply looking for quote bombs to drop in every 2 or 3 paragraphs. Yeah. So they go in with propositions for the player to agree with, and the obedient and well brought up player will hopefully oblige them.
But what I find interesting,
we're not there for insights at press conferences. We're there for ornamentation.
But what I find fascinating here is that players adopt this language of the press conference when talking to the press.
Yeah.
So I'm absolutely convinced that, when the Indian team talks amongst themselves about their problems, batting in New Zealand, they don't talk about, well, we have to take more chances. They talk about a lot more than that in batting terms and in, general how to build an innings, how to approach an innings, which bowler is difficult and why, and how might you change your method to counter that bowler, and so on and so forth. And this new guy Jameson is really tall and so, and what can we do about it, and so on and so forth. But in the press conference, it all gets distilled into this, thing about, we just can't sit around and wait for the bad ball. We have to be positive and aggressive, and it always gets turned into this gladiatorial rhetoric, so to speak.
Yeah.
Why do they do that?
To be fair, that is the kind of the creed of the Kohli team, isn't it? That it seizes the initiative, that it seeks to dictate the terms of the game. And that, I guess, is a kind of a statement to return us to our original discussion point. They're kind of political statements, aren't they?
Yeah.
Statements of patriotic, self-reinforcing confidence. That confidence is as confidence does.
Yeah, but isn't that sort of so obviously for public consumption? And
of course it is.
You can't.
It's like taking a series of throwdowns, Karthikeya. They're just half volleys to be smashed into the side netting.
But why do they do that? Why do they give in to this? And you can imagine, like, for every player,
they have to say something, Karthikeya. They have to say something. That old line about Soviet Russia. We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. Well, press conferences, they pretend to talk and we pretend to listen.
Yeah, but why is that? Well, what is? I mean,
it's so frustrated, Karthikeya.
Yeah, but
it's kind of a ritual. It's performative. It's like charades.
Right, but this is cricket. I mean, it doesn't matter in the large scheme of things. So why not actually talk about cricket?
Yeah.
If you talk to journalists about this, and I have, and they always complain that, today's players are so media trained, and what they mean by media trained is that they've been all, practiced lines, and they've been told what to say, and how to say stuff without actually saying anything. Why is that? What are they so scared of? What are they protecting? And why not actually discuss cricket? It's as if if you discuss, if there's more than like 2 lines of cricket in any story about cricket, then it seems that nobody will read it. But why are the players doing it? Why do they play this game?
Well, they're responding to the cues that they're offered, and frankly, the cues are dull 99% of the time. It's very unusual for a cricket question to crop up in a press conference these days. The players sometimes seem surprised about it as much as anyone. And in the end, I think both the journalists and the players want to get in and get out of the press conference as quickly as they can, with a quota of raw material to shape, with a kind of minimal disruption. So quotes these days are a kind of a sporting commodity, and commodities tend towards the banal and the repetitive.
Because it seems to me that there's essentially one sort of major set of niche responses to this kind of poverty, if you will. And this is all the data people, like what the CricViz people do, and what Freddie and his friends do, and Cricket Info will publish some stuff once in a while,
like you.
Well, yeah, I mean, Rajesh does some stuff, and but the vast majority of what you see on the sports pages, there's no sport in it.
No.
And that fascinates me, because what does that say about what sport is today in this commercial age?
Yeah, good question. I mean, a lot of sport nowadays reads like politics, and sometimes the politics reads like sport, because it's the competition between two teams with their super keen supporters and their slogans and mottos and creeds, and frankly, everything, every kind of human activity is increasingly tribal and has to satisfy us with a winner and a loser. And even war these days is presented as a kind of an offshoot of, Orwell talking about sport as being war minus the shooting. It's not one of his better lines, but it does find an echo in that tendency to see war as a kind of sport plus shooting, which I guess originates in that public school notion of athletic pursuits being a form of preparation for armed conflict. So it would be interesting actually one day to perform the exercise of transposing the quotes on these sports pages with those of the politics pages and seeing how readily distinguishable they are.
They do that nowadays. They'll very often in some of these clickbait type things, you get, who said this, Donald Trump or some comic? And there's a statue to Yaba.
Yeah.
Right. And today's version of Yaba is the flag waving, face painted super fan who travels to all the games and wears the same uniform and shows up. And I'm wondering whether that superfan is a descendant of Yaba in that.
We're talking about S.H. Gascoigne here, who is the sort of the famous sort of personification of the Sydney Hill.
Yeah.
But if you recall, Gascoigne was a pretty ecumenical fan. He was an Australian, but he was a fan of cricket.
Yeah.
He took a lot of visiting cricketers to his heart if they played in a way that pleased him.
Yeah.
He was patriotic, but he wasn't nationalistic. And that's what kind of that's what gives him a resonance, I think, even today. We like to think of ourselves as still embodying that kind of fair-mindedness, that we will applaud good sport, whoever plays it. But I think I think to a great extent we still do. A lot of Australians appreciated the way in which Ben Stokes played that innings at Headingley last year. Yeah. Everyone had to kind of bow before his greatness.
Yeah.
Sometimes the tribute that we pay them is that sort of fundamentally narcissistic one of saying that they play like an Australian.
Yeah.
But is the modern fan a direct descendant of Gascoigne? Well, some are, for sure. Some are. I think there's still one of the saving graces of cricket is that it is pretty generous. It is pretty broad-minded. And in some ways, franchise cricket, by bringing players from different cultural and ethnic and national backgrounds, does have us supporting players that we wouldn't necessarily have felt a kinship with in the past. So that has kind of melted away some of the kind of nationalistic excesses. But I think that the superfan now is kind of more instantaneously reactive and naturally antagonistic, inclined to see heroes and villains, and also to move on very quickly. As you were saying before, these controversies that we get involved in they're pretty transitory. They're pretty efflorescent. We'll find them difficult to remember the week after, although perhaps they do kind of link together in a general kind of chain of agitation and irritation.
In today's world, would Mr. Gascoigne have his YouTube channel and his T-shirt sales and
Well, he was pretty good at branding in his own lifetime. You remember he does appear in kind of newsreels at the time. He does have catchphrases. He does have a side business in selling rabbits from his cart. So he's selling merchandise in a way. Perhaps he was a man ahead of his time.
Let me put a concluding question to you. If sport becomes so quotidian and so everyday that the nature of the occasion itself becomes part of everyday life rather than a special occasion, and this is especially opposite in for cricket, right, where Test cricket is about occasions. Then what do you see as the future of its spectatorship?
Well, you're asking that at a very good time, I think, because here we are in the middle of March at a time
Yeah.
when the Australian cricket season would normally be well and truly done and dusted. There might be a round or two of the Sheffield Shield left in the final, and here we are still playing international fixtures
Yeah.
because these international fixtures have been delayed because of other international fixtures that took place in January. We're kind of in a zombie period of the season where people are going through the motions of playing cricket that they don't really want to play,
Yeah.
and they're watching cricket that I'm not sure they even want to watch. We do seem to have reached a kind of a saturation point that leads on to surf it, and that's the great difference between the cricket that I'm watching now and the cricket that I watched when I was growing up. There's just now so much cricket to pay attention to, all of it worthy, and all of it having its own kind of public, and all of it having its own sort of point or its own context. But as far as a journalist is concerned, it is almost impossible to keep up. Women's cricket, I guess, being the latest example of something that you absolutely have to pay attention to. It's fundamental to the future of the game.
Yes.
Why this World T20 has been so instructive. I wouldn't want to do without that. I'm not going to complain about the addition of that to our calendar.
Yeah.
But there is lacking a kind of a hierarchy of meaning, a hierarchy of significance, where the media is kind of expected to accord identical importance to every single fixture they attend. And fans don't feel that way. And fans are going to kind of start seeing through us as the media if we go on with this pretense that these games actually matter. And I actually think the print media has got to play a part in calling sports administrators to account for staging games that have no significance, that are there principally because the infrastructure exists and financial needs need to be met. But they're serving no other purpose. They're not making anyone particularly happy. They're certainly not making players happy. And I think that level of disenchantment will start to be felt by fans.
I mean, and that is ultimately what politics is about, isn't it? About negotiating how we share our life.
Exactly.
And how we share the sport. Well, on that note, Gideon, this has been a lot of fun. So it's basically been a way for me to, give voice to a lot of things that have been on my mind for a while. So thank you for putting up with me.
Pleasure, Kartik. Yeah, we've been corresponding for many years, but I don't think we've ever actually spoken. So it's good to finally make touch.
It is. And, thank you for, providing the wisdom in this conversation.
Good on you. Cheers, Kartik.
Cheers.